head outside of the United Kingdom on our holidays and to other destinations right around the world. But when those systems goes down, it's a real compromise on safety, because effectively those managing the skies can't actually see properly. And when technical problems happen, they need to make sure safety is paramount, and planes needed to be grounded for the safety of all of us using the skies. And that's exactly what happened. A tech outage led to a temporary grounding of flights only for 20 minutes. Now, the systems came back online within 20 minutes, but the impact is substantial. The aviation sector and airlines operate on such tiny margins. Planes land, they take off, planes land, they take off. Any disruption or delays causes a serious knock-on, and when the whole system goes down, the knock-on is substantial and serious, and that's exactly what we're seeing now. 20 minutes after the outage happened, NATS got their systems back on, and I'm at Heathrow. Planes have started again. We know that Heathrow has only cancelled 16 flights here. Manchester Airport has told me that it's cancelled 6. But that data and information is still coming through. And as we heard from some of those clips from passengers, lots of passengers were heading inbound into the United Kingdom. But because those effectively motorways of the sky and the ability to read them had gone down, planes were diverted and sent back. So we're going to have a situation now where planes are in the wrong place, passengers are in the wrong place, and crews are in the wrong place. And this comes at a time when it's the 1st of August tomorrow. It is globally the busiest time for travel. And this is just not what the aviation and airline sector wants to have as its peak time happens. It wants its customers to have confidence that things won't go wrong. And lots of investigations happened a couple of years ago when a similar outage happened with NATS. Their systems went down, 700,000 passengers were disrupted, and it took about a week to recover that. Now, as I say, lots of reviews happened to try and stop what's happened today, and it's happened. Now, the good news is it only happened for 20 minutes, whether that was a beneficiary of the fact that those reviews had happened and systems were in place, but it still happened, and there's going to be disruption. And I would imagine people who are heading away on their summer holes in the next couple of days or coming into the UK might be feeling a little bit nervous. But as I say, operations are trying to get back to normal at Heathrow and other UK airports at the moment.
Simon, thank you very much indeed for that update. Well, transport and travel expert Simon Calder spoke to me earlier, and he said that aside from the economic loss, such disruptions cause significant emotional distress for passengers.
Yeah, the huge emotional cost of this. Everybody is looking at the economic cost, or at least in the aviation industry, and the shutdown of Heathrow on the 21st of March because of a fire at an electrical substation. That cost the airlines £100 million. Well, it costs a couple of 100,000 passengers their travel plans. Desperately difficult times. Everyone is really emotionally invested in their travels. And yeah, we get used to the idea of a delay of an hour or two. But if you're told, as for example, passengers travelling from London City to Glasgow tonight have been told your flight is simply cancelled, then you're not able easily to switch to another flight because there simply aren't the seats available. And while it's easy to say what people's rights are, you've got to have an alternative flight as soon as possible, and that can be on a different airline, whatever is going to get you there fastest. If there aren't any seats available, well, that's just awful. Airlines, again, having to put up passengers in hotels, but there are going to be thousands and thousands of people stuck at various airports, I fear, overnight tonight, and I'm not sure there will be enough room for them.
Well, as always, you can get more information on the very latest on this disruption and the ongoing disruption at various airports in the UK on the BBC's website. There's a live page there being updated minute by minute if you have time to step away from the TV. But for now, let's move you on to the other top story of the day, and that is what is happening in Gaza. A US official says Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will travel to the Middle East on Thursday to discuss the next steps in addressing the desperate situation in Gaza. It comes as families of Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza say the plan by the UK and other European countries to recognise a Palestinian state validates terrorism. Well, Sir Keir Starmer announced yesterday that the UK would recognise a Palestinian state in September unless Israel meets certain conditions, including a ceasefire in Gaza. Opposition parties have criticised Keir Starmer's plan as a bargaining chip, saying the state should have been recognised earlier. But the government stressed that part of the reason for the move now was to try to change the situation on the ground in Gaza. Today, the Gaza Health Ministry says 7 more people have died of conditions linked to malnutrition over the last 24 hours. That brings the reported number of hunger-related deaths since the start of the Gaza war to 151 people, 89 of them children. Well, joining me now is our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Bechega, in Jerusalem, and in Westminster, our political correspondent, Damian Grammaticus. Hugo, let me go to you first of all. We've heard in the last hour or so that Steve Witkoff will travel to Israel to talk about Gaza. What more are we hearing?
Yeah, so this is going to be the first known visit by Steve Witkoff to Israel since May, and it comes amid stalled negotiations for a ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas, and amid the catastrophic situation in Gaza with starvation across the territory. So I think this shows that Gaza is again a priority for the Trump administration. Just days ago, President Trump himself said there was starvation in Gaza, which marked a rare public disagreement between the president and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has repeatedly denied that there is starvation happening in Gaza, despite reports of Palestinians starving to death, also the images of emaciated children across the territory, and reports by a number of aid organizations and also the United Nations. Now, this visit happens amid international anger over what's happening there, the dire humanitarian situation. So a US official said Steve Witkoff will be having meetings with Israeli officials to address the situation in Gaza. There have been reports suggesting that he will also visit Gaza and visit some of the sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this controversial new mechanism that is supported by the Americans and also by the Israelis, largely bypassing the United Nations and aid organizations which have decades of experience in Gaza in the distribution of aid. This is a system that has been heavily criticized by virtually everyone who's not involved with it, and has been blamed by aid organizations for being part of the problem in Gaza because of the very limited amount of aid being handed out to Palestinians in Gaza. And I think for the families of the hostages, this could be the hope to restart these negotiations for a possible ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas.
Hugo, thank you very much. Let's speak now to Damian. And Damian, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's been a lot of pressure from the opposition parties, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, the Green Party, against what Labour have done, against what Keir Starmer did. They're saying that it's, the conditions put on Israel shouldn't have happened in the first place, that Palestinian statehood should just be recognised. But then you have, of course, the families of the hostages complaining that this is rewarding terrorism. So pressure on Keir Starmer from all sides.
Yes, so on the sort of political pressure, he has criticism. He has criticism from both sides of his decision to say he will recognise Palestinian statehood in September if conditions are not met, including ceasefire, aid on the ground, commitment to a peace process, that sort of thing. Now, on the one hand, you have, as you say, for more on the left side, you have the Liberal Democrats and the Greens who said, well, there should be no conditions attached to Palestinian statehood. If you believe Palestinians have the right to a state, well, then that should be unconditional, and it's not something that should rely on actions by Israel to grant that or not. On the other side, you have criticism from the Conservatives on the right saying that this is absolutely not the right time to recognise Palestinian statehood because it won't advance peace, it won't advance a ceasefire, it won't advance getting the hostages released by Hamas, and they say that this is an issue of political management. Keir Starmer with his own party, many of his MPs wanting this, increasing numbers vocal, and that he's dealing with that. And then, of course, yes, criticism from others who are watching this, particularly families who have relatives held hostage or who were hostages, who've described this as a moral failure, said shame on you, Keir Starmer, and saying that this decision does not advance peace, it rewards the activities of Hamas and rewards terrorism by recognising or saying you will recognise a state entity while Hamas is still on the ground, while it's still carrying out its activities, then that isn't something that is advancing peace. It is doing the opposite. It is rewarding violence.
Damien and Hugo, thanks to both of you. And let's now hear from Khaled El Gindi. He's a visiting scholar at Georgetown University, but he's also former negotiator for the Palestinian Authority. He gave me his reaction to what the UK government has said.
I think given the extremely alarming conditions in Gaza, where mass starvation, Gaza's now entered officially a state of famine. And we're seeing hunger-related deaths each and every single day. So I think given this dire situation, the UK and other major powers are desperately trying to impact Israel's decision-making. And I think this is, Keir Starmer's decision to announce that the UK would recognize Palestine by September if there weren't a ceasefire and major changes in the humanitarian situation, is part of that attempted pressure on Israel. I don't think it will. I think it will have very limited impact, because recognizing a state of Palestine certainly impacts the political realm, but doesn't really directly affect realities on the ground. Those are being determined by Prime Minister Netanyahu in conjunction with decision makers in Washington, namely President Trump.
Here in the UK, a High Court judge has ruled that Palestine Action can challenge the government's decision to ban it as a terror organisation. The group was outlawed after damage was caused to planes at RAF Brize Norton last month in protest against Israel's war in Gaza. The UN has warned that banning the group under anti-terrorism legislation is an unjustified labelling of a political protest movement. Still to come on The World Today. Tsunami alerts have been scaled back across much of the northern Pacific following a powerful earthquake off Russia's Far East. And tens of thousands of people have lined the streets of Birmingham to pay tribute to the Black Sabbath frontman Ozzy Osbourne, who died last week. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching The World Today on BBC News. Two British brothers, aged 11 and 13, have drowned off a beach on the east coast of Spain, according to local authorities. It happened on Tuesday evening after entering the water at Larga Beach in Salau, Tarragona. Police said sea conditions were rough, and local media reported the beach had a yellow flag throughout the day, meaning swimming is allowed but caution is advised. Their father, who was also in the water, was rescued by emergency workers. A man has been found guilty of attacking two female police officers during a violent disturbance at Manchester Airport, which went viral on social media. Mohammed Fahir Amaz, who's 20, was convicted at Liverpool Crown Court of assaulting PC Lydia Ward and PC Ellie Cook last July. The jury was unable to reach verdicts on allegations that Amaz and his brother, Mohammed Ahmed, assaulted PC Zachary Marsden, causing actual bodily harm. Rowan Bridge reports, and a warning, his piece does contain distressing images from the start. The police officer shown with an injury in this report has consented to the video being shown.
An explosion of violence and chaos caught on camera. Mohammed Amaz, here in blue, and his brother punching police as they try to arrest him. Amaz hits a female officer's nose so hard it's broken. After being tasered, Amaz is kicked in the head by PC Zachary Marsden. This part of the violence was caught on camera by onlookers and soon went viral on social media, causing outrage. But it was published without showing what happened before.
And we are headed to Rochdale police station.
At the time, the brothers protested their innocence, appearing online complaining about their treatment.
The police officers that have assaulted both Fahir and Ahmad.
In reality, it was Amaz who started the violence. Meeting his mother off a flight, she tells Amaz she's been racially abused by a passenger. He confronts the man in Starbucks and then headbutts him before throwing punches. The brothers then punch the police as they come to arrest him. In court, they said they acted in self-defence. Amaz was found guilty of assaulting a member of the public and 2 police officers, but a jury was unable to reach a verdict on whether he and his brother assaulted PC Marsden. In court, the officer was described as an uncontrolled bully with a badge. It was accepted that PC Marsden kicked Amaz in the face and stamped near his head, but he said he did so to stun Amaz and to get control of his radio, which was hanging loose. This trial, though, was about the actions of the brothers and not the police. They're still the subject of an independent Office for Police Conduct investigation who are looking at the actions of 2 police officers. The Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police welcomed the conviction of Amaz, saying his appalling conduct has now been exposed to legitimate public scrutiny. Our officers are decent people who routinely place themselves in harm's way to protect the public. They deserve our respect and support. This verdict marks the end of this trial, but it doesn't draw a line under the controversy surrounding what happened. The brothers now face a retrial on the final count the jury couldn't reach a verdict on. Rowan Bridge, BBC News, Liverpool Crown Court.
Tens of thousands of people have lined the streets of Birmingham to pay tribute to the Black Sabbath frontman Ozzy Osbourne as his coffin was driven through his home city ahead of his funeral. The 76-year-old, who had Parkinson's disease, died last week. Our entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson was there.
Birmingham saying goodbye to a heavy metal hero. A city coming together to support a grieving family. Sharon Osbourne, flanked by her son Jack and daughter Kelly, with their famously media-shy elder sibling Amy, also there to honour her dad. Ozzy Osbourne always said he wanted his funeral to be a celebration and not a moat fest, and that was certainly the case here.
So I've got a bat umbrella because we all know Ozzy bites the head off bats.
Earlier, fans of all ages had claimed their viewing spots from 4 in the morning.
I'm here to pay my respects to an absolute legend. I was absolutely gutted because I actually went to the gig, and like 2 weeks later, couldn't believe it. I was in the post office just bursting into tears.
There was even a pooch of darkness called Doggy Osbourne. While this fan, called Goose, had met Ozzy just 2 weeks ago and got a special autograph.
He had one hand on my arm just as steady and the other hand drew that signature. And I got it tattooed that day, so the ink is in my skin. Ozzy seemed so strong as he possibly could be that day. So for him to leave us so soon after was just, it was so hard to bear.
Kelly Osbourne's sunglasses were a poignant nod to her dad's signature look, while Sharon Osbourne found her own way of paying tribute.
My heart's broken. My heart's broken. And I think a lot of our hearts are broken, right?
That was tough. That was worse than the Queen, that was.
Sharon looked so frail, and I really hope that she was happily overwhelmed with what was here for her today, because everyone was so loving and caring and concerned. We just want to thank you for everything he's done for us all.
A private funeral for Ozzy Osbourne will take place tomorrow. This was a very public celebration of a man who will be deeply missed.
God bless you all.
Well, Colin told me more about the atmosphere in Birmingham.
The atmosphere has been quite incredible today. It's been so much joyous. It's also been emotional. There's been lots of singing and chanting. But that moment when the Osbornes got out of their vehicle, you could really feel the thousands of people lining Broad Street here, right in the centre of Birmingham. You could feel the people wanting to let the Osbornes know just how much Ozzy Osbourne meant to them. And when you look at the tributes, I've been looking through some of these, it doesn't take long to just pick out places from all around the world. There's one from Budapest just behind me. There's the one behind from that, R.I.P. Ozzy from Kazakhstan. I mean, that just gives you an idea of just what a worldwide story his death has been, and just how many people it has affected.
Yeah, and you could see the family, you know, Sharon, they were so upset, they were so emotional.
Yeah, really, really emotional. Sharon, a lot of people commenting on how frail she looked when she was getting out of the vehicle, but she was flanked there by Jack and Kelly, her son and daughter, and also Amy, their elder sibling, who very, very seldom appears in front of the cameras. She was there wanting to pay tributes to her dad, and it was interesting to see the ways that they were all doing their own little nods to it. We believe that Sharon was actually wearing Ozzy's wedding ring around her neck, so she's taken Ozzy's wedding ring off Ozzy and is now wearing that herself. And she also gave the peace sign as she headed back into the vehicle, which was a sign Ozzy was very known with, and Kelly wearing the round sunglasses that her dad was so synonymous with.
And that was what happened in Birmingham today. Now let's just take you briefly, if we may, to the BBC's website, because our top story, of course, is that flight disruption at all these various airports in the UK. If you want to read about the very latest, who's been affected, which airports are still affected, do go to the BBC's website using the website or the app. There's a live page there. These live pages are updated minute by minute with all the latest information for you. I'm back after a short break. Stay with us on The World Today. This is The World today on BBC News, the latest headlines. Flights across the UK have been disrupted by a technical fault with air traffic control. Some planes are now taking off, but passengers are being warned to check before they travel. One of the strongest earthquakes in history strikes Russia's Far East, sparking tsunami warnings as far away as California, which have been scaled back. YouTube is now the UK's second favourite viewing service, and it's winning over viewers of all ages. Tsunami alerts have now been scaled back across much of the northern Pacific following a powerful earthquake off Russia's Far East. The 8.8 magnitude quake struck off Kamchatka, injuring several people on the remote Russian peninsula, with warnings of aftershocks and waves of up to 4 metres reported there. It also sparked tsunami warnings of varying levels across much of the world. The highest warning levels were in place in Hawaii and across much of Japan. There have also been alerts and warnings of differing levels across the Pacific. Well, let's take a look now at how the situation unfolded from the start. The earthquake struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula at around about 1:27 p.m. local time. People in the region immediately began sharing videos of themselves as their building shook. The region's governor then called for calm. Well, the earthquake is one of the most powerful ever recorded, and it did cause building damage, but there were no reports of anyone being killed. Within hours, the tsunami began rolling into the nearby Sakhalin region. Houses on the coastline were flooded. Buildings across the coast were swamped by the incoming tide. Panicked sea lions were seen diving into the sea as quake hit the island of Antisvorov. Well, with more on the impact on Russia, here's our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
The power of nature to spark panic. This is how some Russians experienced the earthquake. Shaken to the core and wondering if their homes would remain in one piece. In the Russian Far East, they're used to tremors, but not on this scale. A cancer hospital was shaken too, right in the middle of an operation. The doctors kept calm and kept going. The governor of Kamchatka said it was the strongest earthquake in decades and called for calm. Tsunami waves more than 5 meters high struck the town of Severokurilsk, flooding the port and washing away more than a dozen boats. In Kamchatka, buildings are being checked, the damage assessed, and they're bracing themselves for aftershocks in the days to come. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, the quake triggered real-time tsunami warning systems. In Japan, nearly 2 million people were ordered to leave their homes. In a country where memories of the 2011 Fukushima earthquake and tsunami are still fresh, people were seen taking shelter on top of buildings, away from any threat of waves. The Japanese Meteorological Agency has now removed all tsunami warnings, though, downgrading them to advisories. Our Tokyo correspondent Shaima Khalil has been following all the developments.
This is how thousands on Japan's Pacific coast were woken up. Sirens alerting them of a tsunami, this one in the Hokkaido area. For hours, dozens of waves hit the coastline, some over 1 meter high, before the Japanese Meteorological Agency downgraded the alert to advisory along the whole Pacific coast. Earlier in the day and in the searing heat, at the height of school holidays, families have abandoned the beaches. Instead, many were stuck in traffic jams as they tried to evacuate.
I walk near the sea, so I heard the warning there. My boss told me to go home to be with my kid.
In Hokkaido, a group gathered on the rooftop of a building as the warnings continued throughout the day.
People here in Japan are used to receiving earthquake and tsunami alerts, but a warning that includes the Fukushima area, which this one does, always triggers a heightened sense of concern because of what happened in 2011, that catastrophic earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear meltdown. The Fukushima nuclear power plant operator said that all workers have been evacuated and no abnormalities were reported.
Like Japan, Hawaii also sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, which means it's prone to earthquakes and tsunamis. Sirens sounded on the beaches where 6-foot-high waves hit the shores. and ships were sent out to sea.
We were luckily one of the last ones that got back onto the cruise ship, and then we could see a lot of other people like getting dropped off and just lining up, but they didn't make it. They were then told to get up to higher ground on shore, so it was quite scary.
Many roads were gridlocked on this very tense day across the Pacific coasts. Hours after the huge earthquake in Russia's Far East, the warnings may be downgraded, but the people in the region remain vigilant. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Tokyo.
Well, the waves then travelled across the Pacific and hit California and Hawaii. Western US states, as well as Canada's British Columbia, were all placed on alert. In Hawaii, people were caught up in traffic as they tried to obey those directives to get to higher ground. The warning there has also been downgraded to an alert, and some people have been told they can head home. On the US mainland, waves of up to a metre above tidal levels have also been recorded in Northern California, but no major damage has been reported. Warnings remain in place, though, in parts of the coast from Humboldt to the Oregon border. Well, Rachel Burrows is on a cruise ship off the coast of Hawaii. She was on a tour when the emergency warnings came through.
It was quite scary because all the sirens then started going off around the area because it was obviously quite serious. And then we got off the tour bus, and then everyone was just running, trying to get on the ship because they were closing the ship off because we needed to get out to sea. So we were luckily one of the last ones that got back onto the cruise ship, and then we could see a lot of other people like getting dropped off and just lining up, but they didn't make it. They were then told to get up to higher ground on shore, so it was quite scary.
Tiziana Rossetto is a professor in natural hazards engineering at the University of Delft in the Netherlands. She talked me through what exactly made this earthquake and the subsequent tsunami not quite as devastating as was first feared.
So a tsunami is triggered when a large earthquake happens under the ocean or at the ocean floor. And that earthquake, in order to make a tsunami, has to have a large vertical uplift because it has to displace the ocean above it. And that lifting up of the water and dropping it basically creates the tsunami wave. In this case, although the fault rupture, so that the piece of crust that basically ruptured, creating the earthquake, was really large. It was over 300 kilometers long and about 100 or so kilometers wide. And it did move a substantial amount. The vertical displacement wasn't as large as it could have been. And this is actually a very good thing. And it created waves that are less high than could have happened. Nevertheless, it's not to be underestimated that a tsunami inundation of a meter can cause death.
And tell me a little bit more about the warning system, because this obviously proved to be extremely effective, which is heartening, isn't it, given that in future we may not have these events that don't end up being of the magnitude we expected.
Absolutely. I think this is a real success story. The fact that the evacuation alarms and orders, went out fairly early on meant that people who are less mobile, more vulnerable, were able to be evacuated to higher land or to taller buildings, and definitely away from the beaches and sort of any port areas. This is extremely important because what we don't want to have is a repetition of, for example, what happened in the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where there wasn't any tsunami warning system in place and over 235,000 people died. So I think we can really think of this as a real success.
The UN says attacks by Jewish settlers on Palestinians living in the Israeli-occupied West Bank are on the rise, with violence up by 13% over the past year. In the latest attack on Monday night, Palestinian activist Auda Hathalin, who helped make the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land, was killed during an attack by settlers. Jewish settlements are illegal under international law, but are built on land which Palestinians want for a future state. Earlier this month, 2 men were killed near the town of Sinjil. One of them was Palestinian-American Sayafullah Musalat. John Donnison reports now from there.
This summer, the occupied West Bank is burning. And it's extremist Jewish settlers caught on CCTV who are igniting the fires. In the Palestinian village of Burqa the next morning, you can see the damage.
People are in their home, sitting in their houses. Why you attack them? Cars sitting in the street. Why you burn it? Why you come and do all this nonsense? This is what you try to prove? This is not going to bring peace for you.
These kinds of attacks by settlers are happening now on an almost daily basis. Property, cars being destroyed, olive groves set on fire, livestock poisoned, shootings, and Palestinians even beaten to death.
Saif al-Musalat was among the latest to be killed. The 20-year-old Palestinian-American who ran an ice cream shop in Florida had been visiting his family home when he was set upon by Israeli settlers. Dr. Moataz Tawafshi discovered the body. He said the young man had been beaten to death with sticks and clubs. He was shocked to see the bruises. It's criminal. It's terrorism, he went on. And for Saif's American father, Kamal, he wants answers.
You know, we're in pain. We're in grief. And we want justice, you know. We hope that maybe his sacrifice, you know, will not go in vain. You know, something will change now. Allahu Akbar.
And as the grieving for Saif al-Musalat continues, the settler violence documented by the United Nations has not stopped. The latest Palestinian to be killed, a young journalist and activist, earlier this week. John Donnison, BBC News in the occupied West Bank.
Still to come on The World Today. YouTube becomes the second most watched viewing service in the UK, surpassed only by the BBC. And NASA, an Indian space research organisation, launch a new satellite which it's hoped will help predict and prepare for natural disasters. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. YouTube has become the second most watched viewing service in the UK, surpassed only by the BBC. The regulator Ofcom's latest annual report finds the platform is the top choice for children and young adults and has become increasingly popular for older audiences too. Broadcast TV remains in long-term decline but still accounts for most at-home viewing at 56%. Elsewhere, the Australian government has announced it will ban under-16s from having YouTube accounts. The platform was initially supposed to be exempt from a wider social media ban for children, which is due to come into force in December. That decision, though, has been reversed. Well, let me talk now to Jordan Schwarzenberg, who is the co-founder of Arcade Media at Burger. Is co-founder of Arcade Media and manager of the very well-known YouTube group, The Sidemen. Now, you're 7 friends from around the country, and basically what you've done is created this huge collective where you have 22 million subscribers on your channel, millions more on subsidiary channels. So you know better than anything, Jordan Schwarzenberger, how YouTube works. You are a huge success on it. So why do you think YouTube is now on the cusp of potentially, you know, getting past the BBC in terms of most popular platform?
So, I mean, look, for anyone who's been in the space for a long time, this is no surprise. I've been doing this now for 10 years. The Sidemen have been making content for 13 years, probably individually. YouTube's 20 this year, right? So again, no surprise. I think the reason why is because YouTube represents the shift into decentralized media. If there's nothing else to think about in culture, it's this, that we now live in an on-demand society, right? We have total control over our feeds. We have total control over what we consume, when we consume it, and YouTube feeds that. And ultimately, it has allowed individuals, everyday kids in their bedroom, to have access to audience and also money when the audience grows. So it's this perfect economy. And again, it's no surprise for anyone that's been in it. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
But it still hasn't surpassed the BBC.
For now. No, look, I think, you know, what we know is that the trajectory is going one way, and look, I wouldn't put them as a like for like. YouTube is
They're very different, though. One's a public service broadcaster, and one is a platform for videos.
Totally, but also people confuse YouTube. It's not a social media platform, it's a search engine, and it's really the equivalent of Google, but for video. So it's a library, it's vast, it's endless. You can't really compare the two, but what we know is that kids especially are turning to YouTube first.
I don't allow my kids to have YouTube. They're not allowing it. They're not allowed it. Australia now is banning under 16 from having YouTube accounts. Do you think there's now a push against these young people having these accounts, kids having these accounts? Because you can get quite addicted to things like YouTube Shorts if you're a youngster. It's almost like a social media website. I mean, I know you're saying it's not, but it feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, social media is, you know, more peer-to-peer. I think that Shorts, TikTok, the kind of high dopamine content, yes, I totally agree. There's limits that need to be put on that because what it does to the brain and the chemicals, etc., is quite alarming, especially for young kids. But look, YouTube is long-form content. You've got the most diverse range of creators. You've got a platform, I think, that is one of the most actually safe platforms in the world in terms of their brand safety and everything else. So yeah, I wouldn't keep your kids from YouTube. It's great.
You're staying off YouTube, kids. Sorry. What would you advise the BBC to do to stay on top?
I would advise the BBC to be radically honest about the future and really embrace where consumption and where attention is moving, which is to YouTube.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Jordan, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. And let's talk a little bit now about the world of science and space, because for the first time in 350 years, a woman has been appointed the role of Astronomer Royal. It's the most senior astronomer in the UK. Professor Michelle Doty's job will be to promote Britain's space science, and she's been talking about her journey with our science correspondent Palab Ghosh.
We put all of the electronics into this protective box, and it's on the main body of the spacecraft.
Professor Michelle Doherty shows me the lab she developed instruments to test for the possibility of alien life in our solar system. They're now on board a spacecraft headed towards the icy moons of Jupiter. But Professor Doherty's journey into space began long ago, when she was a child.
This photograph here shows a picture of my dad and me in the middle, and then my sister sitting down in front of us. I was about 10 then. One of the things he did was he built his own telescope. And I remember my sister and I, Susie, helped mix the concrete for the base of the telescope, the most important part, of course. That was when I got my first view of Jupiter and its 4 moons, never thinking I'd end up doing what I'm doing today.
Her achievement is all the more remarkable as she didn't study science after she left primary school in South Africa, where she grew up.
So the school I went to, I didn't do science.
Good heavens, how did you catch up?
It was really hard.
But she was so clever, she soon caught up and came to the UK to become one of the country's leading space scientists.
I still pinch myself that I'm involved in outer planetary missions. The fact that I'm Astronomer Royal, I'm pinching myself. I can't quite believe it.
The Greenwich time ball falls, indicating that it's 1 o'clock to sailors on the Thames, harking back to a bygone age of astronomy. The role of Astronomer Royal was created 350 years ago, here at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. The job back then was to advise the King on how to use the stars to improve navigation at sea. Over the centuries, 15 men have held the post of Astronomer Royal. Professor Doherty hopes her appointment will attract more girls and women into science.
When young children in particular see someone that looks like them, doing a job they think they would never get an opportunity to do, it changes their mindset a little.
The woman who was so motivated to study science after seeing the planet Jupiter as a girl that she sent a probe to investigate it, now has the job of making all of us as excited about space as she so clearly is. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
NASA and the Indian Space Research Organisation have launched a new satellite which it's hoped will help predict and prepare for natural disasters. The device, which touched off from southern India, carries one of the most sophisticated and powerful radars ever developed. Scientists say the satellite will closely monitor the Earth's surface, measuring ice sheets, coastal regions and other land features, supplying unprecedented amounts of data. Dr. David Whitehouse is a space scientist and an author, and I asked him to explain exactly how these satellites might be able to predict these natural disasters in the future.
It's a radar satellite, so it sends 2 radar beams from orbit and receives their reflection, and therefore it can operate in clouds and at night, and makes a complete map of the Earth every week. But because one of the radar beams is of a slightly longer wavelength than usual, this gives it unique abilities. For instance, when it's looking at forests, it can, one part of the radar beam can look at the forest canopy, but the longer beam will actually reach down to the surface, telling us what's on the surface, giving us the water content and various other bits of information. So this gives it a broad spread of information, not only looking at forests, but ice sheets, water resources, and also volcanoes.
Love it or hate it, technology and sport are becoming ever more closely intertwined.
This is Signal Iduna Park, the largest stadium in Germany and home to Borussia Dortmund. But as well as being an icon of German football, it's also home to some really innovative tech and AI. And I'm here to go and have a look.
With a capacity of over 80,000, Signal Iduna Park is best known for the Yellow Wall, a terraced stand that holds 25,000 standing fans, making it the largest freestanding grandstand in Europe. Here, data is collected by cameras and sensors placed around the stadium, monitoring the action on the pitch. Amazon Web Services, which powers this data collection, says that it collects 3.6 million data points from one Bundesliga game alone. In F1, where AWS also operates, it says it collects 1.1 million data points every second.
There's so much more data collection in sport now than there ever was when I was a kid growing up as a sports fan. And so being able to process voluminous amounts of data that's being captured and then turn that data into insights, we're seeing just a wide array of use cases for that.
Who is the market for all of this data? Is it broadcasters? Is it fans? Is it sporting organizations? Is it clubs? Who wants this kind of data?
Yes, it's all of the above. So yes, I mean, when you look at the different use cases, I think of it in sort of 3 tranches. At the governing body or the league level, the data is being used to inform things like officiating, rule development. At the club level, it's driving, game strategy, scouting, recruiting, training. And at the fan level, it's driving engagement, right? It's edifying your audience, being able to tell a new story, to be able to point out why a particular feat of athleticism is so exceptional.
But it's not just football, the round ball kind, where this kind of data is being used.
The NFL created the digital athlete.
The NFL, the richest sport league in the world, is also embracing technology in a big way.
To help prevent head injuries, the Helmet Impact Detection AI model.
But crucially, they say that this data is more than just a gimmick for showcasing statistics. Via their digital athlete platform, it's improving the safety of players in what can be a high-impact sport.
The Digital Athlete is an application we built in teamwork with AWS, and we're collecting multiple data points that are going into this platform to create a simulator for player health and safety situations. So this could be for the player's perspective, for the coach's perspective, for the health technician's perspective. And it's really to simulate things and understand how different changes to the game, whether it's equipment or rules, they impact the players themselves. And our goal here ultimately is to have the safest game possible and to extend longevity of the game, the players, everyone there. And we do that through this simulator, data-based.
There are applications for fans too. The German football authorities say their Bundesliga app now serves millions of fans a year, providing real-time data and video content to users. The DFL say all this is not about replacing the passion or the soul of football. It's about enhancing it. Whether you're a football purist or a tech fan, it seems the prevalence of data in the beautiful game is only going to increase.
I will give away the vast majority of my money. It's my full-time focus for the rest of my life.
Und wenn Menschen bei uns in Europa angekommen sind, dann finde ich, haben sie ein Recht darauf, menschlich behandelt zu werden.
He really truly loved this regime and Vladimir Putin. That's why Vladimir Putin hated him so much.
Every time I lost, I just did a deep dive into the reason why we lost.
There are times when I have noticed something more emotional in one take than the other, which I think comes from being a woman.
When the big names talk, they talk to us.
Hello, I'm Geeta Gurumurthy. This is The Context on BBC News.
This is going to be the first known visit by Steve Witkoff to Israel since May. He will also visit Gaza and visit some of the sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Criticism from others who are watching this, who've described this as a moral failure, said shame on you, Keir Starmer.
Recognizing a state of Palestine certainly impacts the political realm, but doesn't really directly affect realities on the ground.
Coming up on The Context in the next hour, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff heads to Israel once again for talks about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We'll be live in Jerusalem. The US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, defies President Trump and leaves US interest rates unchanged again. We'll get reaction live from New York. Also on the programme, a technical problem at air traffic control causes major disruption at airports across the UK. And coming up in the security brief later in the programme, our resident military analyst Mikey Kay will be focusing on just how effective sanctions might be against President Putin in curbing Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. Hello and welcome to the programme. Well, as international concern continues about unfolding famine in Gaza, the White House has confirmed that President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, is flying to Israel for talks. A US official said Mr. Witkoff will meet with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for discussions on how to get more aid to civilians in Gaza and efforts to kickstart the stalled ceasefire talks. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says 7 more people have died of conditions linked to malnutrition over the last 24 hours. The reported number of hunger-related deaths since the start of the Gaza war has now reached 151. As Israeli strikes continue across the territory, which has been under Israeli blockade, rescuers say another 14 Palestinians have been killed in 4 separate incidents today, 3 near aid distribution sites. Well, it's thought Mr. Witkoff will visit the controversial aid distribution sites run by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The UN says a total of almost 800 Palestinians have been shot dead whilst waiting for aid near GHF sites. Now, a former British-Israeli hostage, Emily Damari, who was held by Hamas for 15 months in Gaza, has called Sir Keir Starmer's plan to recognise a Palestinian state as a moral failure. The Prime Minister announced yesterday that unless Israel meets conditions, including a ceasefire in Gaza by September, the UK will recognise Palestine as a state. Tonight, the Chief Rabbi called the government's position a betrayal of Israel's quest to live free of terror on its borders. The government says it has been unequivocal in telling Hamas to release hostages and disarm. Lucy Manning has this report.
British-Israeli Emily Damari was held for 471 days by Hamas as a hostage before she was released in January. Her fingers blown off, her legs shot. She saw Hamas up close, surviving being held in a cage in the tunnels. On social media, she attacked the announcement that the UK could recognise a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Starmer is not standing on the right side of history, she said. This is not diplomacy, it is a moral failure. Shame on you, Prime Minister. This move does not advance peace, it risks rewarding terror. It sends a dangerous message that violence earns legitimacy. The Prime Minister said yesterday steps must be taken to deal with the intolerable situation the Palestinians are facing, and the moment to act was now.
It's important that we set out this pathway to recognising a Palestinian state in order to increase the pressure on the Israeli government to lift those restrictions on aid getting in and to also to bring Israel to the table.
Steve Brisley's British-Israeli sister and nieces Liane Noya and Yael Sharabi were murdered on October the 7th. His brother-in-law Eli was released as a hostage this year, emaciated and weak. Eli's brother Yossi's body is still being held hostage.
Why would they release the hostages? It seems to me that all Hamas need to do now is to hold firm until September, and then they will be rewarded for keeping hold of those hostages. They will be incentivised to keep hold of those hostages until such time as they get the recognition from the UK that they're looking for.
Do you not accept the Prime Minister's view that the suffering must end and now is the moment to act?
It's long been my position that the suffering on both sides of the border needs to end, but that suffering could be ended by Hamas releasing the hostages.
The Prime Minister's been hitting the phones trying to get international support, telling leaders that Palestinian state recognition isn't just a gesture, but saying that what's needed is a ceasefire, the hostages to be released, more aid, Hamas's removal and long-term peace negotiations. The government now says it will assess both Israel and Hamas's actions. Hamas still holds 50 hostages, around 20 still alive. Neither force nor diplomacy has secured the last ones their release. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Well, we can cross live to Jerusalem and our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bachega. Hugo, we know that Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, is on his way to the Middle East. He's going to be heading there for more talks. Do we know what in particular he is trying to achieve? Is it a focus on aid delivery? Is it a focus on longer term negotiations, or both?
Yeah, so this is the background to this visit, the first visit by Steve Witkoff to Israel since May. And the context, obviously, is that this visit happens amid stalled negotiations for a ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas, and also amid the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza with starvation across the territory. And I think it's an indication that Gaza is again a priority for the Trump administration. President Trump himself just days ago said there was starvation happening in Gaza. This marked a rare public disagreement between the president and his close ally, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has repeatedly denied that starvation is happening in Gaza, despite a number of aid organizations, the United Nations, reporting a very dire situation, warning of mass starvation in the territory. And the UN, aid agencies and some of Israel's allies blame Israeli policies for what's happening now in Gaza. So Steve Witkoff will be meeting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow. According to a US official, they'll be discussing the next steps to alleviate the situation in Gaza. There have been reports suggesting that he will also visit Gaza and the sites run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this controversial organization backed by the Americans and the Israelis. This is the new mechanism that has been introduced by Israel, largely bypassing the United Nations and aid agencies that have, been operating on the ground for decades for the distribution of aid. And this is, a very controversial mechanism, has been heavily criticized by virtually everyone who's not involved with it. And I think for the families of the hostages, this could bring some hope that he could revive negotiations for a possible deal with Hamas for the final hostages who remain in captivity to be freed.
Hugo Bachega, thank you very much indeed. Well, the UK's plans to recognise Palestinian statehood are particularly significant, given its pivotal role in Israel's creation through the 1917 Balfour Declaration. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, referred to this as he attended a UN conference to promote the two-state solution in New York yesterday.
And you will have seen in my statement that I made reference to the unique position of the UK in relation to the situation we see in Israel and Gaza and the occupied territories and the Balfour Declaration.
David Lammy there speaking yesterday. So what was the Balfour Declaration and how significant was the UK's role? Well, I'm joined by Jonathan Schneer, American historian of modern Britain. He's written a book called The Balfour Declaration, The Origins of the Arab-Israeli Conflict. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Jonathan Schneer. Obviously, the interpretation of history can be made in many different ways and perhaps none more so conflicted than this particular part of the world. But just give us a brief sense of how important the British role was in this region.
In 1917, the British role was crucial, and the British did, in fact, play the crucial role by being the first European government to state publicly, to declare publicly that it favored the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. They did it because they thought that it would help them win World War I. I mean, there were other considerations as well, but they had been convinced by the Zionist leader in Britain, Chaim Weizmann, who was a politician of genius, that Jews played a fundamental subterranean role in world affairs, and that they could keep Russia in the war because they were Bolsheviks, but also that they could get America into the war because they were financiers.
And in terms of the impact on the Palestinian people, it was profound.
Oh, of course. The Palestinian people who were not Jewish outnumbered the Jews in Palestine in 1917 by about 7-1. And all of a sudden, the greatest power in the world, with the exception, I suppose, of the United States in 1917, although that's debatable, but a great power had come out supporting the homeland of a distinct minority in the country and promising to protect the rights of the majority. It was as far as they were concerned, it was an upside down declaration.
Yeah, seen as a great betrayal. In terms of when you look at the ongoing, very complex history, of course, over the years, do you think the fact that Britain has made this statement yesterday, Keir Starmer's made this statement, do you think people see it in terms of the history now? Do you think that resonance is still there in the region?
In the region, possibly. I don't live in the region. I'm a historian, and I'm always disappointed at how little most people are in history. So I would say that David Lammy's evocation of Britain's historical role is apt, except I think he kind of got it upside down, because if the Balfour Declaration had established a home for the Arab people in Palestine and protected the rights of the minority Jewish people there, history would certainly have been very different, and who knows what could have happened.
OK, we will leave it there. Jonathan Chenier, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, there's major disruption at many airports across the UK after all departing flights were paused because of a technical issue at air traffic control. All airports from London, Heathrow and Gatwick to Manchester and Edinburgh have been affected. The National Air Traffic Control Service says the issue has been fixed, but the delays are continuing. Passengers due to travel are being told to check with their airline. Simon Browning is at Heathrow.
Now, that outage only lasted for 20 minutes and flights have resumed across the United Kingdom. Here at Heathrow, you can hear behind me, flights have begun again, and we've been told at Manchester Airport that's the same case, and other airports too. But the issues will be substantial. We know that Manchester Airport has now cancelled 6 flights for the rest of the evening, and there's delays, and there's the most cancellations here at Heathrow, where we believe that's upwards of about 15 to 20. Now, the issue is that there will be huge knock-ons. Planes will be out of place because they've been delayed. Crews will be out of place because they've been delayed. Pilots will be out of place because they've been delayed. And the issue is that the airline and the aviation industry operates at such tight margins. Planes land, they take off, land, they take off. And if things are out of position and are delayed, it causes massive issues to the system as a whole. Now, that will be a huge concern to the aviation airline industry because it's the peak summer holidays. It's when we're all going away to Mallorca, to Rome, to the United States for our holidays. And resilience is such a crucial part of how this system works. Now, an outage happened like this 2 years ago on the August bank holiday. It took much longer to reserve, and the knock-on effects were enormous. 700,000 people were estimated to be disrupted, and it took almost a week to recover and bring and repatriate everybody home. Now, the airlines and aviation companies did a lot of work to research and to stop similar scenarios happening, but unfortunately it has happened again, and that's already meant that Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary, effectively Europe's biggest low-cost airline, has already called for the National Air Traffic Control Service's boss to resign because of this outage.
Simon Browning there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now, the US central bank has defied strong pressure from President Trump to lower interest rates. The Federal Reserve has left the benchmark rate unchanged in a range of 4.25 to 4.5% for its fifth straight meeting. Its last rate cut was in December. The decision came hours after new figures showing that the world's biggest economy returned to growth in the second quarter, expanding at an annual rate of 3% in April to June, reversing a 0.5% decline in the first 3 months of the year. Well, in a press conference a short time ago, the Fed Chair Jerome Powell referred to the ongoing uncertainty regarding US tariff policies.
Changes to government policies continue to evolve, and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. Higher tariffs have begun to show through more clearly to prices of some goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. But it is also possible that the inflationary effects could instead be more persistent, and that is a risk to be assessed and managed.
Well, speaking just before the US rate decision, this is what President Trump had to say about the Fed Reserve Chair.
I call him too late. You know, he's always too late. Even if he does it today, probably won't. I hear they're going to do it in September, not today. For what reason? Nobody knows. But Europe, as you know, cut their rates 11 times in the last short period of time. But the good news is we're doing better than anybody anywhere in the world. Nobody's doing anything even close to us.
We can cross live to our North America business correspondent, Erin Dalmore. So, Erin, Trump resuming his take on the Fed chair. What's been the sort of wider reaction today to what we've seen on rates?
Right. Well, President Trump has been taking up his usual tone, criticizing Fed Chair Jerome Powell for being too late to cut interest rates. Now, this move to decide to leave interest rates unchanged at this July meeting is not unsurprising. This was very much expected among folks who have been watching the Fed. And really what we've been looking at is whether Jay Powell said anything about the chances for a September rate cut. Now, in very classic fashion, Jay Powell has been tight-lipped today, saying that he's not going to get into that, saying always that the Fed is very data-dependent. But, you know, in regards to that criticism that President Trump launches about Powell being too late, well, what Powell says is that there are risks to acting too early or too late on interest rates. He says that if they act too early, there's a chance that inflation or higher elevated prices could become stickier or more enduring. If acting too late, then we could see some harm to the labor market. And that's the line that the Fed is trying to toe here. He spent a lot of time today in his press conference talking about the Fed's dual mandate, exactly that, keeping prices in check and also maximum employment in the United States, and trying very hard here not to make a lot of news today.
Well, Erin, stay with us, because amid the ongoing uncertainty about tariffs, President Trump today announced the US will impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from India from August the 1st. In a Truth Social post, he says India's tariffs are amongst the highest in the world. He also says the world's fifth largest economy will face an unspecified penalty for continuing to buy military equipment and energy from Russia at a time when everyone wants Russia to stop the killing in Ukraine, quotes. Well, in the last hour, the White House says President Trump has signed an executive order implementing an additional 40% tariff on Brazilian goods, taking the total tariffs to 50%. Let's go back to Erin Dalmore on this. Obviously, we've got this big tariff deadline at the end of the week, Erin, and India has sort of pushed back somewhat fairly modestly and carefully, I guess, implying that the talking is still going on, which is what Trump said as well today.
Right, and it's something that we've heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as well. We spend a lot of time talking about this August 1st deadline, but to hear Scott Bessent say it, yes, tariff rates could go up, but he said that he doesn't imagine much harm can be done over days or weeks as long as countries are continuing to talk to the U.S., to negotiate with the U.S. in good faith. Those were his words. And so it doesn't sound like President Trump is afraid of elevating some of these rates for just a little while at least, and that seems to be how the news is being received. I spoke to my colleague Davina Gupta, our correspondent in India, and she was saying that the way businesses are taking the news now is not knowing whether that's a final resting point for tariff rates or just another step on a very long road. And the way she put it is that she didn't know whether this was a posturing tactic. That's what they've been telling her by President Trump, whether his words are here to stay or whether there's a bit of bluster and negotiation there. You know, she mentioned also that India's been very resolute about not wanting to take in any genetically modified foods, wanting to be protective of its own domestic dairy industry and really protect its own domestic producers. Haven't budged on that.
Erin Dalmore, thank you very much indeed for that update. President Trump's son, Eric, has spoken about the toll that politics has taken on the Trump family since his father has been in the highest office. Eric Trump, who oversees the Trump Organization whilst his father's running the US, accompanied the president on his recent personal trip here to the UK, to Scotland, of course, and he's been promoting the company's golf resorts there. He spoke exclusively to our sports editor, Dan Rowan, who started by asking if he would ever consider running for office himself.
The answer is I very much doubt I would even consider in 28. Listen, I've got a great company. I've got young kids. Politics is brutal. It's brutal. They put us through hell. They tried to bankrupt us. They tried to put my father in jail. They tried to indict him. They tried to smear him. They made up Russia hoaxes, which were nonsense, as everybody knows. They tried to impeach him. They tried to take him off ballots. They tried to censor his free speech. They pulled him off of every channel and listen, they tried to kill him twice this year, right? Or, inflict serious harm. Politics is brutal. We were lucky. We came up. We were in the business world. We had made a name for ourselves. We were familiar in front of the camera from seasons of The Apprentice and our own kind of business endeavors. We had a little bit of that armor. You better make damn sure that your kids are able and have the backbone to withstand that, because in any system over here in America, they're coming after you, they're coming after the family. We've all played a major role in this book, and whether or not I was take it on at some point in my life, I just don't know.
Do you think your father would like to see you run potentially, or at least one of the family in future?
So you asked, could we? And I think the answer is, could somebody in the family? Certainly. I think there's another question, which is, would we? And a long time ago he said, he had to answer the same question, and his answer to that question was, if it got so bad that I had no other choice, I would. Maybe the same question can kind of be posed of us. If it got so bad, maybe we would. The great thing about my father is I think he's built a Republican Party that has fight, that has backbone, that has personality, and that has the ability to win. And by the way, a platform that's right on the issues that really face the world, but also face America. And I think there's a tremendous amount of great people out there. I think J.D. Vance would do a great job. I think Marco Rubio would do a great job. There's, we have real talent in the Republican Party in the U.S., and I think they can certainly continue my father's legacy outside of our family.
Eric Trump there speaking to the BBC's Dan Rowan. One of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded has struck off the eastern coast of Russia, sparking tsunami alerts across much of the Pacific. The 8.8 magnitude earthquake was near Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula just before 11:30 a.m. local time. Well, tsunami warning systems went off first in Japan, where nearly 2 million people were ordered to leave their homes. The waves then travelled across the Pacific and hit California and Hawaii. Western US states, as well as Canada's British Columbia, were placed on alert. Warnings were issued in countries as far apart as Colombia and New Zealand. Many of those warnings have now been downgraded. Here's our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg.
The power of nature to spark panic. This is how some Russians experienced the earthquake. Shaken to the core and wondering if their homes would remain in one piece. In the Russian Far East, they're used to tremors, but not on this scale. A cancer hospital was shaken too, right in the middle of an operation. The doctors kept calm and kept going. The governor of Kamchatka said it was the strongest earthquake in decades and called for calm. Tsunami waves more than 5 meters high struck the town of Severokurilsk, flooding the port and washing away more than a dozen boats. In Kamchatka, buildings are being checked, the damage assessed, and they're bracing themselves for aftershocks in the days to come. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Tens of thousands of people have gathered in Birmingham to watch Ozzy Osbourne's final journey through the city centre. The heavy metal legend died last week at the age of 76. cortege paused at the Black Sabbath Bridge, allowing his family to look at flowers and other tributes left there. The Osbournes stopped at the bench to read some of the thousands of messages.